3:17 in the morning. Vivian Sue sat on the bench outside the operating room, the fluorescent lights above pinning her shadow to the cold tile floor. The air was thick with the mingled stench of antiseptic and rust, a smell that crept into her nostrils and twisted her stomach into knots. Her phone screen lit up again. Her mother-in-law, no ex-mother-in-law, had sent 7 consecutive 60-second voice messages, the last one followed by a text. "Vivian, you cursed woman. If my son doesn't make it, I'll take you down with me." Vivian's eyelashes lowered. Her fingertip hovered over the screen for a beat. Then she locked it and flipped the phone face down on her knee, cutting off the frantic stream of unread notifications. The red light above the operating room doors still burned, like a bloodshot eye that never closed. Inside lay a man named Derek Shaw, 34 years old, once her husband. At this moment his skull was fractured, his spleen ruptured, his bones broken in a dozen places. 3 different surgeons had rotated through already. 2 hours ago he'd fallen straight down from a 12-story scaffolding on an abandoned construction site, crashing onto a pile of exposed rebar on the ground floor. The foreman who'd brought him in, a stocky man everyone called Fatty Wong, was still crouched in the corridor corner, his cement-dusted hands clamped over his head as he gave his statement to a police officer. "Officer, I swear it wasn't our fault." He slipped. The security cameras caught it all. He'd been showing up drunk for weeks, hands shaking so bad he couldn't even clip his safety harness. "We told him not to go up there, but he cursed us out and went anyway." The officer scribbled notes. "Any other unusual behavior lately?" "Unusual? That's putting it mildly. This guy used to be sharp, but the past 6 months he's been like a ghost, bloodshot eyes snapping at everyone. Last month the client came for inspection and he started screaming at her in front of everyone. She pulled the whole project on the spot. Then he just..." Fatty Wong's voice dropped, a tremor of genuine fear creeping in. "When he fell, he didn't even make a sound." Vivian sat on the bench, every word drifting into her ears. Her face showed nothing, like a porcelain mask. A nurse hurried out with a consent form. "Are you family? We need a signature for the surgery." Vivian stood up. Her legs were numb, but she held herself straight. "I'm his ex-wife. His parents are on their way. Can we wait 10 more minutes?" The nurse gave her a look. Tired, clinical, the look of someone who'd seen too many emergencies to be moved by anything. 15 minutes max. "We can't wait longer than that." She turned and walked away. Vivian sank back onto the bench, pressing her palms to her face. Her fingertips were ice cold, her nails clipped short and clean. She curled them slightly against her knees. She remembered another night 7 years ago. Also past midnight. Also a hospital. She'd been doubled over with acute appendicitis and Derek had carried her through the emergency doors, sweat streaming down his face, eyes red-rimmed, gripping her hand so tight his voice shook. "Vivian, don't be scared. I'm right here." His palm had been so hot back then, burning hot. Hot enough to make her believe with absolute certainty that this was the man she'd spend her life with. 7 years later, he lay on the operating table, and all she felt sitting here was an empty, hollowed-out stillness. Not hatred. Hatred had burned itself out over those long 7 years. What remained was something else, a cold, flat calm. Like a house that had survived a fire, the walls still standing but everything inside had turned to ash. She rose and walked to the window at the end of the hall. Outside, the city sprawled in the pale blue-gray of early dawn. Somewhere in the distance she could hear the rhythmic scrape of a street sweeper's broom. Morning was coming. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Xander Shin. "Pull Derek's bank statements, call logs and WeChat transfers from the last 3 months. As fast as you can." The reply came within seconds. "How's it going over there?" "Is he?" "He's in surgery. But whether he wakes up or not, I'm settling the books." "Done. You'll have it before sunrise." Vivian slipped the phone back into her pocket and returned to the bench. As her back pressed against the cold plastic, she closed her eyes. In her mind's eye, an autumn afternoon from 7 years ago materialized. Golden ginkgo leaves blanketed the ground. She'd stepped out of the Design Institute's revolving door in her cream trench coat, and there he was, standing at the bottom of the steps in a cheap suit with sleeves too short, his tie crooked, clutching a box of her favorite chestnut cake. His ears were so red they looked about to bleed. "Me missu. I was passing by anyway, thought you might like these." She'd laughed and taken the box, thinking, God, this guy's hopeless. Now she knew better. It wasn't hopelessness. It was the carefully crafted camouflage of a predator. Chapter 2, The Trap. 7 years ago. 7 years ago, Vivian Su was 28 and the youngest senior designer at the Provincial Architectural Design Institute. She had 3 major provincial projects under her belt. Her father, Gregory Su, was a retired chief engineer at the Provincial Construction Group, a man whose name commanded respect throughout the industry. Her mother, Grace Chin, was a fine arts professor specializing in historical building restoration, with a network of former students scattered across the country. Vivian herself was famous for more than her pedigree. At 5'7", she had the kind of lean, elegant frame that made clothes look effortlessly expensive, paired with features that were striking rather than merely pretty: high cheekbones, clear brows, and a natural radiance that came from a life lived without want. She'd been the architecture department's unofficial it girl all 4 years of college. Her suitors could have lined up from the classroom building to the main gate. But she was picky, not about money or status but about that elusive thing, the feeling of a string being plucked somewhere deep in her chest. Then Derek Shaw appeared. It happened at the Provincial Construction Association's autumn networking mixer. He was wearing a cheap charcoal suit, pleather shoes, and a tie knotted so badly it looked like a noose. He stood in a corner clutching a glass of water, his whole body rigid as a wire about to snap. Someone pulled Vivian over to introduce them. Miss Su, meet Derek Shaw. He just transferred to our 3rd branch as a site supervisor. Don't let the title fool you, the guy's got serious skills. Last year he single-handedly managed 3 bidding sections on that disaster relief project. Works harder than anyone I know. Vivian nodded politely and extended her hand. Nice to meet you. Derek took her fingertips, his palm was slick with sweat. He pulled his hand back so fast it was almost a flinch, his voice barely above a whisper. Miss Su. Hello. Vivian didn't think much of it. She'd met dozens of eager young engineers at these events. But then Derek started showing up in her life with uncanny frequency. She'd work past midnight and step out of the institute building to find him squatting on the curb across the street, holding a container of still steaming porridge. Miss Su, I was just in the neighborhood finishing up some paperwork. Figured you might not have eaten. She'd go to a construction site for inspection, twist her ankle climbing down from the 8th floor scaffolding, and the next day he'd be assigned to that same project as the on-site coordinator, with a bottle of liniment tucked in his pocket. She'd call in sick with a cold and somehow he'd found her address. He'd bike halfway across the city, leave a bag of medicine and fruit hanging on her doorknob and text her, Miss Su, I left some things at your door. Get some rest. No need to reply. The care was so cautious, so clumsy, so utterly without demand. Vivian wasn't made of stone. Slowly she started replying to his messages, then initiating lunch dates, then thinking to herself that despite his humble background and modest means, at least this man was genuine. One day she asked him directly, Why are you so good to me? Derek's ears went translucent red. His voice was so soft she almost missed it. I liked you the first time I saw you. But I know I'm not good enough for you. I just want to be kind to you. So please don't feel pressured. She looked at his lowered lashes, his clenched fists, and something in her chest cracked wide open. She'd been sheltered her whole life. Everyone around her had been decent. Her father, principled and honest. Her mother, warm and generous. She had no idea that there were people in the world who could wrap themselves in the skin of harmlessness while carrying the most venomous calculations in their hearts. They dated for a year and then married. The Su family had reservations. Gregory called Vivian into his study and smoked 3 cigarettes in silence before speaking. That man's foundation is too thin. His character hasn't settled. I'm not saying this because he's poor. I'm saying it because there's something in his eyes. I can't read him. Vivian, still awash in romance, brushed it off as old-fashioned caution. Dad, he's good to me. You can't choose where you come from, but you can choose what's in your heart. He works so hard, he's so sincere. I just want a normal life with him. Gregory sighed and stubbed out a 4th cigarette. It's your road to walk. I'll say one thing, being good to you is the easiest thing in a marriage to change. She didn't listen. The wedding was held at the city's finest hotel, funded mostly by the Su family. Derek's parents came in from the countryside. His mother wore a bright red embroidered cotton jacket that stuck out like a fire hydrant among the suits and gowns. Vivian didn't care. She linked her arm through Derek's and made the rounds toasting guests, feeling as though the whole world was cheering for her. On stage, Derek gave a speech with tears streaming down his face. "I'm just a poor kid from the sticks, and marrying Vivian is the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me. I'll work like a dog for her till the day I die. If I ever betray her, may I be struck by lightning and rot in hell." The audience applauded. Grace wiped her eyes. Vivian stood beside him in her custom white gown, smiling so wide her cheeks ached, convinced she was the happiest bride on earth. No one could have predicted that the marriage was a meticulously plotted act of revenge. 3 months and the shift began. At first it was just suggestions. Derek would say, "Vivian, you're working till midnight every night. It's wrecking your health. Why not take a couple years off? I'll support you." She'd laugh and shake her head. "I just started that heritage building project. I'm the lead designer. I can't walk away now." His expression would darken, but he'd say nothing. Then came the complaints. She'd come home late from work and find him sitting in the dark living room, not turning on a single light until she walked in. "Oh, Miss Sue finally remembers she has a house?" She'd discuss a project with a male colleague and he'd lean over her shoulder to glance at her phone. "Oh, Engineer Zhang's sending you plans at 11 p.m.? Interesting industry you work in." Then came the deflation. She won a provincial design award and he weighed the trophy in his hands with a sneer. "What's this really worth? Half the judging panel are your dad's old contacts. You think you earned this fair and square?" She bought a new dress and he looked her up and down. "You can't see that roll around your waist? Spare everyone the eyesore." Vivian started losing weight. From a healthy 110 she dropped to 98 pounds. She couldn't sleep, lay awake staring at the ceiling until dawn. She started checking herself in the mirror before every outing. "Is this outfit plain enough? Is my makeup too much? Should I not wear this lipstick?" She handed over her paycheck. He told her she couldn't spend money on her own. "Tell me what you want and I'll get it for you. Women shouldn't hold too much cash, they get careless." Every time she asked for a new blouse, a lipstick, a bottle of moisturizer, he'd interrogate her for 20 minutes and then say no 9 times out of 10. "We have so many household expenses. Can't you be more responsible?" She stopped seeing her friends. Derek's reasoning: "Your friends are all snobs. Every dinner they just brag about their rich husbands and gifted kids, trying to one-up you. Don't go, it'll only make you miserable." He stopped talking about her work. Derek's reasoning: "Everyone knows your real talent is your dad's connections. How many times did your proposals get rejected before he called in favors? Don't embarrass yourself." Vivian was like a piece of iron laid on a whetstone, ground down day after day. She grew thinner, blunter, more and more unsure of who she was. The worst part was that she started believing him. Believing she really was incompetent, really was coasting on family connections, really couldn't survive without him. She felt worthless, undeserving of anything good, a burden on everyone around her. In the 5th year she secretly went to see a psychologist. The doctor, a 50-something professor, reviewed her assessment results with a deepening frown. "Miss Sue, have you felt completely out of control emotionally lately? Any urges toward self-harm?" Vivian's hand instinctively drifted to her left wrist. That morning she dug her fingernails into it in the bathroom, hard enough to leave marks, because Derek had complained about a burnt fried egg and said, "You can't even cook an egg right. What's the point of you?" She'd needed the pain to stop herself from crying. "A little," she said. The doctor ordered a full workup. When the results came back, Vivian sat alone in the hospital corridor reading them. Severe depression, moderate anxiety disorder, immediate intervention recommended. She sat for a long time. Then she folded the report, stuffed it in her bag and walked out without filling the prescription. On the way home she told herself, "It's not that serious. Just push through. He'll get better. He used to be good to me." She pushed through for 7 years. Until that afternoon 3 months ago. She'd left work early to pick up a file she'd forgotten at home. She opened the door quietly, trying not to wake Derek from his nap. But as she reached the bedroom she heard his voice, on the phone in a tone she'd never heard before. Calculating. Like a snake flicking its tongue. "Don't be like that. I told you I'll handle it as soon as this is done. I know it's hard on you, but I'm not done milking her family's resources yet. Walking away now would be stupid. Just give me 6 more months. Once I've squeezed that West Side project out of her old man, I'll have the leverage. The Seuss won't mean jack. Divorce? I'll make her beg me to stay. Pause. Then he laughed. A laugh that made the hair on Vivian's arms stand straight up. He's like a block of wood now. Not even worth touching. Mopes around all day like a walking funeral. Don't worry, babe, you're the only one I care about. Vivian stood in the hallway, her back pressed against the cold wall, shivering from head to toe. Her fingers were clenched so tight around her bag strap that her knuckles went white. She didn't push the door open. She turned around, stepped back to the living room as silently as she'd come, and sat down on the sofa. On the coffee table sat the fruit platter she'd arranged that morning. Derek loved mangoes, so she'd spent a full hour cutting each piece into perfect little diamonds. She dug her fingernails into her palm until she drew blood. That evening, Derek went out for business drinks. Vivian waited an hour, then went through his phone. The passcode was his birthday. She'd always known it. She'd never checked his phone before because she'd trusted him. She combed through his call logs, his WeChat messages, his hidden photo albums. And she found Lin. A woman 5 years younger than Vivian, with a soft, demure face and a social media feed full of afternoon teas and selfies. Derek had her saved as babe. Their chat history spanned 2 years. From flirty to explicit, from miss you to hotel location pins. And underneath, Derek's complaints about Vivian. That woman is like a piece of driftwood now. Always with that sad face. Such a turn off. Her old man's been cold to me lately, starting to get suspicious. Need a new angle. Hang in there. Once I squeeze everything out of her family, we'll be set. The last message was from 3 days ago. Lynn had sent a photo of a pregnancy test result captioned, "Derek, I'm pregnant. When are you leaving her?" Derek's reply, "Soon. Just wait for my signal. Keep the baby safe." Vivian read every single message. When she finished, she put the phone back exactly where she'd found it and went to the bathroom to wash her face. The woman in the mirror had a gray pallor, puffy under eyes, and a mouth that drooped at the corners. Deep lines carved themselves into her face like permanent scars. Her hair was dry and lifeless, her eyes empty. She stared at that reflection for a long time, and felt a shock of alienation. Who was this? Where was the Vivian Sue who'd won national design awards and held audiences spellbound on graduation day? Where was the Vivian Sue who'd stood on that stage and promised to make cities more humane through architecture? Where was the woman everyone had called brilliant? Slowly, she raised her fingers to the mirror and pushed her mouth upward into a smile. The expression was stiff, but in her eyes, something that had been buried for 7 years, was flickering back to life. The next morning when Derek woke up, Vivian had breakfast ready. Fried eggs, toast, warm milk, exactly as he liked it. Derek sat down, took a bite and frowned. "Why is this so bland? No salt." "I put some in, maybe not enough." Vivian sat across from him, sipping warm water, her voice as soft and steady as always. "Oh, by the way, Derek, that new car you mentioned. I had my dad ask around. His dealer contact can get you an internal price. The latest X5, about 15,000 under market. Want to check it out?" Derek's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Seriously? How much? When can I get it?" "Dad said if you're interested, he'll put in a word and push up the allocation." Vivian smiled and took another sip of water. Derek couldn't hide his glee. Suddenly the bland egg didn't matter. "I'll go look this week. Your dad really knows people. I used to say the wrong things, but you'll thank him for me, won't you?" Vivian nodded. "Of course." She watched him wolf down his breakfast, crumbs clinging to the corner of his mouth, and felt the fire inside her burn a little hotter. From that day on, Vivian changed. Outwardly, she remained the same compliant wife, cooking, cleaning, agreeing with everything Derek said, bowing her head when he lost his temper. Derek was convinced his years of psychological warfare had finally broken her completely. He even bragged to Lynn, "That woman doesn't dare breathe without my permission now. She'll do whatever I say. Once I've got her dad's West Side deal, we're out of here." What he didn't know was that Vivian spent every night after he fell asleep working on 3 things. First, she reconnected with her university mentor and old classmates. She'd set up a new WeChat account on an old burner phone, and in a tiny 5-person group chat, she'd explained her situation succinctly. Her mentor, a 70-something professor, called her directly after reading the messages. "Vivian, I still have that heritage renovation proposal you did back in school. Come back to the table. My network is yours. And that husband of yours? I never liked him." Second, she gathered evidence. Screenshots of Derek and Lynn's conversations were backed up to the cloud. Receipts for all major household expenses were scanned and archived. Records of Derek's side deals using her father's connections, contracts, transfer logs, she collected methodically. Some of it wouldn't hold up in court, but it was more than enough to destroy his reputation in the industry. Third, she started taking care of herself. Fitness, skincare, clean eating. 7 years of marriage had dulled her edges, but the foundation was still there. She woke at 5 every morning to run, did 40 minutes of yoga every night and switched to a high-protein, low-fat diet. In 3 months she'd lost 12 pounds, her jawline had sharpened, her skin had regained its clarity, and the light in her eyes had crept back millimeter by millimeter. Derek noticed nothing. He went to work, came home, ate, slept, lulled into complacency by the illusion of a conquered wife. If anything, he grew crueler. The meals weren't varied enough, the cleaning wasn't thorough enough, her tossing in bed disturbed his sleep. Vivian accepted every complaint, apologized for every flaw. And then after he'd passed out, she'd open her laptop and type in an encrypted document. The title, Operation Payback. Every step was outlined with precision. Legal, legitimate, and surgically devastating. She was waiting for the right moment. For her evidence chain to be watertight. For the last pieces of the Sue family's resources, the ones Derek had siphoned off, to be fully accounted for. For herself to be rebuilt from the ashes. Then the moment arrived ahead of schedule. 3 months later, Derek fell off a construction site. No one pushed him, no one touched him. He just lost his footing on the scaffolding platform, 12th floor straight down. His crew said he'd been a wreck lately because the West Side deal, Gregory had never caved, fell through. The client had dressed him down in public for biting off more than he could chew. Derek had thrown his helmet across the room and spent every night after that drinking alone in the site shed. His head was just gone, Fatty Wong told the police. He slipped. The cameras caught it. Vivian got the call while she was at her drafting table. She took 5 seconds to absorb it, then said calmly, "I understand. Send me the address." She finished the line she was working on, a community arts center elevation with curves like an unfolding magnolia, saved her file, shut down her computer, grabbed her coat and walked out. On the way to the hospital she texted Xander. Pull Derek's bank records, call logs and WeChat transfers from the last 3 months. ASAP. Xander was her senior from design school and the first person who'd supported her unconditionally when she decided to rebuild. He knew everything about her situation. He'd never asked invasive questions. He just showed up with what she needed, every single time. This time was no different. Chapter 3. Reckoning in the Waiting Room. Derek's surgery lasted 6.5 hours. When the operating light finally went green and the lead surgeon walked out, morning had fully broken. Vivian rose from the bench, her legs trembling with pins and needles, knees stiff as rusted hinges. "Doctor, how is he?" "He'll live." The surgeon pulled off his mask, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "But the brain injury is severe. A hematoma in the left temporal lobe compressing the nerves. We're looking at possible cognitive impairment. Memory, judgment, emotional regulation, all could be affected. Worst case scenario, permanent need for full-time care. But it's early. We'll know more after recovery." Vivian nodded. "Understood. Thank you, doctor." Derek's parents arrived that afternoon. His mother, still wearing that same bright red embroidered jacket she'd worn to the wedding, burst into the ICU, took one look at her son's bandaged head, the tubes snaking out of him, his ashen face, and collapsed on the floor in a wailing heap. His father stood behind her, red-eyed, hands trembling violently. Vivian stood at the doorway. She didn't go in. Mrs. Zhou spotted her and launched off the floor like a rocket, lunging at her with a pointed finger. "Vivian, you have the nerve to show up here. If you hadn't divorced him, he never would have fallen apart. He wouldn't have been drinking. He wouldn't have been on that site. You did this to him. Give me back my son." Nurses and other family members in the corridor turned to stare. Vivian stood her ground, didn't retreat, didn't argue. She looked at Mrs. Zhou's hysterical face with an eerie calm. She knew there was no point reasoning with people like this. To Derek's family, she would always be the outsider who'd ruined their son. Even if he'd cheated, manipulated, defrauded, gambled, none of it would ever be his fault. Because he was theirs and she never was. Mrs. Zhou. Vivian waited until the woman was gasping for breath before speaking, her voice level, matter-of-fact. I have other things to attend to. I've prepaid Derek's hospital bills for 3 months. If you need anything further, contact my lawyer. She pulled a business card from her bag. Mrs. Zhou knocked it out of her hand. It fluttered to the linoleum floor. Vivian didn't stoop to pick it up. She turned and walked away. Mrs. Zhou's shrieks echoed after her. Vivian, come back here. You think you can just walk away after what you did? I'll never let this go. Vivian didn't look back. Outside the hospital, the autumn wind hit her face, cold, dry, filling her lungs with something that felt almost like clarity. She stood on the steps and took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, the weight on her chest seemed to ease just a fraction. Her phone buzzed. Xander had sent a compressed file. Got it. More interesting than expected. Take your time reading. She replied, thanks, and caught a cab home. Once inside, she brewed a cup of hot tea, sat at her desk, and opened the file. Xander's source was solid. A friend in financial risk management who'd used legitimate channels to pull Derek's public transaction records from the past 3 months, along with some social media data. The more Vivian read, the colder her blood ran, and the sharper her smile grew. 3 months. Derek's bank account had received 3 large transfers totaling $120,000. The sender was an offshore shell company whose legal representative was Lin's cousin. And where had the money gone? 80% of it had been funneled to an overseas sports betting platform. Derek was gambling. No wonder his performance had cratered. No wonder he'd been showing up drunk to work in broad daylight. He'd skimmed material funds from the site to try and claw his way back from losses, then got his hands on another 6 figures through Lin's cousin, hoping to win it all back in one big bet. Instead, he'd lost everything. He'd racked up a mountain of high-interest debt, and the collectors were hounding him daily. But the real kicker was Lin's pregnancy test. It was a fake. Xander had tracked down records from a private clinic. Lin had gone in for testing, but the result was negative. She'd invented the pregnancy to pressure Derek into finalizing the divorce and splitting Vivian's assets. Once she realized Derek had pissed away every cent he had, she'd ghosted him a month ago and gotten involved with some tea merchant she'd met at a trade show. Your ex-husband's current status, Xander wrote at the end of his message. Career dead, bank account empty, mistress gone, body broken. Congratulations, the universe just swept your battlefield for you. Also, that West Side deal your dad turned down? Derek tried to pitch it to the client using your family's name behind your back. The client saw through it. Words spreading through the industry. He'll never work in construction again. Vivian stared at the screen for a long time. Then she let out a laugh, not joyful, not cruel. Just a sound of final understanding. She'd spent 7 years unable to fathom why Derek hated her so much, why he'd tried so relentlessly to destroy her. Now she had the answer. Because he was insecure. Because he resented his own origins so deeply that he'd convinced himself climbing the social ladder meant dragging someone else down. He hadn't married her for love. He'd married her to prove a point, that a nobody could pull a princess off her pedestal and grind her into the mud. But he'd overestimated himself and underestimated life's brutality. When the Sue family's connections dried up and his own self-destruction kicked in, gambling, drinking, burning every bridge, his grand ambitions had shattered faster than cheap glass. He wasn't destroyed by Vivian. He was destroyed by himself. She closed the document, poured herself a glass of red wine, and stepped onto the balcony. The city glittered beneath her in the night, a sea of lights, each one a story. The fire that had burned inside her for months had begun to temper itself, not extinguishing but steadying into something warm and constant, radiating outward from her core. From now on she would live well. Not to get revenge on anyone. For herself. Chapter 4, Counter-Strike in Rebirth. Derek spent 2 full weeks in the ICU before being moved to a regular ward. Another month later he could sit up and speak in short sentences. But his short-term memory was shot. He'd forget what he'd said 5 minutes ago, forget whether he'd taken his medication. His emotions were a runaway train. He'd explode in fury one moment and burst into tears the next. Vivian's lawyer visited him at the hospital. Derek lay propped against a pile of wrinkled pillows, his face waxy and gaunt, cheekbones jutting out like blades. When he saw the lawyer walk in, his eyes flickered with alarm, quickly masked by bluster. "What are you doing here? Where's Vivian? She doesn't have the guts to face me herself." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and placed a document on the nightstand with measured professionalism. "Mr. Zhou, Ms. Su has asked me to handle some legal matters. This is a supplementary agreement on division of marital assets. Please review it." "Supplementary agreement? We're already divorced. What more does she want?" Under Article 1092 of the Civil Code, if one spouse conceals, transfers, sells, damages, or squanders community property, the other spouse may petition the court for redivision. In the 3 months prior to your divorce, you withdrew $120,000 from the household account for non-family purposes. The lawyer pulled out printouts with each large transfer circled in red. These funds constitute unauthorized disposition of community assets. Ms. Su requests the return of her share, $60,000. Derek's face went from pale to crimson. "Those funds, I lost them gambling, correct?" The lawyer's tone was flat. "We have your transaction records with the betting platform. If you cannot pay in a lump sum, Ms. Su is willing to accept installments. However, if you refuse, we will petition the court for enforcement, including the seizure of all assets under your name. That includes your parents' house in your hometown." Derek jerked upright. "That's my parents' house. Which is registered under your name, making it executable." The lawyer pushed the document forward. "Please sign." Derek stared at the papers for a long time. His hands shook. The bedsheet crumpled beneath his white-knuckled grip. Finally, he let out a laugh, crooked, ugly, made more grotesque by his bandaged skull and hollowed cheeks. "Vivian's got nerve. Lying here half dead while she schemes against me. She used to be so obedient, did whatever I said. Now she's got wings. Mr. Zhou, Ms. Su is simply exercising her legal rights. If you don't sign today, we'll file suit within 3 business days." Derek's jaw muscles clenched and unclenched. For 3 full minutes, the room was silent except for the beeping of monitors. At last, he grabbed the pen with his good hand and scrawled his signature across the page. When he was done, he threw the pen aside, closed his eyes, and let his chest heave. The lawyer collected the signed document and gave a curt nod. "Wishing you a swift recovery." He turned and left. The moment the door clicked shut, Derek's eyes flew open. He stared at the empty ceiling, and for the first time in his life, a flicker of genuine blankness crossed his face. He remembered the shining Vivian from all those years ago. White blouse, high ponytail, drawing architectural sections on the chalkboard with sunlight spilling over her profile. She'd been so beautiful it hurt to look at. He'd told himself back then, "I'm going to have her." He'd had her. And then he'd spent 7 years grinding her to dust. But now the dust was rising again, burning brighter than he'd ever seen her. And he was the one turning to ash. The lawyer delivered the signed document to Vivian's studio as she was wrapping up a meeting with an important new client. Evening Design Studio had been open for just over 6 months. It had grown from a 1-woman operation at a second-hand desk to a 6-person core team with 2 private offices. Word of mouth was spreading fast. This new client was a real estate developer named Ms. Zhou, 50-something, short-cropped silver hair, a voice that cut through conversation like a cleaver through scallions. "Ms. Su, I've looked at your community park renovation." Ms. Zhou slid a tablet across the table, showing Vivian's portfolio. "I don't want some flashy influencer trap. I want something that makes people feel good, respected, comfortable. You understand what I mean?" Vivian nodded. She opened the preliminary concept sketches she'd prepared and pushed them across the table. What she'd drawn wasn't a specific building but a philosophy: preserve the historical street grid, embed modern functionality through careful intervention, let old structures grow new limbs. She wasn't chasing novelty, she was chasing continuity. Ms. Zhou studied the sketches for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes held something Vivian recognized: the light of someone who'd finally found what they'd been searching for. "I've been looking for this approach for 3 years. I've been through 6 firms and they all pitched me crowd-pleasing gimmicks. Miss Su, you've got the job. My legal team will reach out tomorrow." After Ms. Zhou left, Vivian returned to her office just as the lawyer arrived with Derek's signed document. She glanced at his crooked signature, expressionless, and filed it away. "Thank you for handling this," she said. "My pleasure." The lawyer smiled. "Off the record, Miss Sue, you're a different person from the one I met a year ago. The first time we spoke, your voice was hollow, your eyes kept dropping to the floor. Now..." He studied her for a moment. "You're glowing." Vivian blinked, then laughed. "Thank you." That night, she took her team out for hot pot to celebrate landing the Heritage Town project. Xander sat beside her, piling her bowl with tripe and duck blood. The broth bubbled and steamed, fragrant with chili and star anise. Vivian watched her team chatter and argue good-naturedly across the table, and she remembered another banquet 7 years ago. That one had also been steaming and loud and full of toasts. She'd thought it was the beginning of happiness. Now she knew, real happiness wasn't something you got from someone else. It was something you grew yourself. Your roots might push through rubble, but your flowers always turn toward the sun. "What are you thinking about?" Xander leaned in. "The past." "Don't." He poured her a glass of plum drink. "The past is turned. Only the future matters." Vivian clinked her glass against his. "You're right." Through the window, the city's neon signs flickered. The same city, the same night. But Vivian felt like everything had changed. Chapter 5. The Ex-Husband's Return. 6 months later, Derek was discharged from the hospital. His recovery had been worse than anyone predicted. The brain injury had shredded his short-term memory. He'd forget entire conversations, forget if he'd eaten, forget where he'd put his keys. His emotions were a wrecking ball. He'd hurl things, punch walls, scream at his mother until she collapsed in tears. Mrs. Zhou had cared for him for 3 months before her own back gave out. Mr. Zhou's blood pressure spiked twice and landed him in the hospital as well. Eventually, Derek was moved to a rented 1-bedroom apartment, north-facing, dark, with mold blooming on the walls and a cracked window taped together with packing tape. His job was long gone. The construction company had given him a small injury settlement, about $10,000, and a severance that added up to maybe $20,000 total. His parents had sold their house in the county for $30,000 to help pay off his high-interest debt, but there was still more than $20,000 in the hole. Collection agencies called and texted every day. The latest message: "Derek, 1 week left. Then we come visit in person." Derek sat on his broken bed, staring at the clutter and the mildew. His phone screen glowed with that ultimatum. He scrolled through his contacts and called everyone, relatives, friends, old coworkers, begging for loans. No one answered. When he did get through, it was always the same: "I'm tight myself. The kid's tuition is due. Can't help you, man." Last, he scrolled to Vivian's number. He'd deleted it once after the divorce. Then he'd retrieved it from an old backup. He'd held on to it, nursing a secret conviction that eventually she'd come back to him, like always. He'd freeze her out and she'd get desperate. He'd crook his finger and she'd come running, tears streaming, asking what she'd done wrong. He had never once considered that she might actually leave. He'd ground her down so low, smashed her so small, he was certain she didn't have the strength to stand. He dialed. Right. Then it cut to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. The third time, the line went straight to a dead tone. Blocked. Derek stared at the screen, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Over the past 6 months, lying in that hospital bed, he'd had plenty of time to think. Some things he remembered, some he didn't. But he remembered Vivian's face the last time she'd looked at him in that hospital room. She'd stood 2 steps away and her eyes held no anger, no grief, nothing at all. She'd looked at him like he was a stranger. Something had lurched in his chest that day. But he'd brushed it off. He was too dependent, too weak. She couldn't live without him, couldn't even decide what to wear without his approval. How could she survive on her own? Now it hit him. Vivian hadn't just left. She'd escaped. Escaped far beyond his reach. He opened his browser and searched Vivian Sue and evening design. The results flooded in: industry awards, project features, media interviews, bidding announcements. The photos showed a woman in sharp black tailoring, short hair brushing her shoulders, a single pearl stud in each ear. She was smiling, relaxed, glowing with a confidence that was almost radiant. She looked like polished jade, warm but with a cutting edge. One headline read, Evening Design founder Vivian Su, a flower that grew from ruins. Derek read the whole article. Vivian spoke about her design philosophy, about urban public spaces, about her vision for the next decade. Not one word about marriage, not one word about the past, not a single negative syllable. But in the comments section, one reader had written, "Miss Su, I heard you went through a rough marriage. So glad you're thriving now." Vivian had replied, "The past is fertilizer, not a cage. Thanks for your kind words." Derek read that reply and felt ice crawl down his spine. He flashed back to a summer night 7 years ago. He'd been drinking with a buddy in their dorm, and the buddy had asked, "Derek, you're really going after Vivian Su? That woman's notoriously hard to get, and her family's connected. You think you can pull that off?" He'd swaggered through his drunken reply, "Hard to get? That's exactly what I like. Once she marries me, watch me break her. I'll make that Sioux princess understand she's nothing in front of me. I'll drag her down off her pedestal and make her beg." His buddy had clapped his shoulder. "Boss move. Respect." He'd felt like a king back then. A poor kid marrying the rich princess and grinding her under his heel. What a story. Now he sat in his drafty rented room, looking at photos of his ex-wife shining brighter than ever, with not enough money in his pocket to buy a bowl of noodles. He'd spent 7 years crafting a trap, and trapped only himself. The woman he'd tried to destroy was standing at a height he'd never reach. Karma didn't waste time. Chapter 6, The Face-Off. 2 more months passed before Derek saw Vivian again. He didn't seek her out, he didn't have access to her schedule. She'd summoned him through her lawyer to a meeting at a law firm's conference room. When Derek arrived, Vivian was already seated. She sat on one side of the long table, several files spread before her, a cup of green tea steaming beside her elbow. She wore a charcoal cashmere coat over a white turtleneck, clean, composed, radiating an aura of unhurried authority. Behind her stood Xander Shen. He was in a navy suit, tie flawlessly knotted, one hand resting lightly on the back of Vivian's chair. The gesture was natural, instinctive, and it stabbed Derek straight through the ribs. Back in college, Xander had been Vivian's shadow. Derek used to mock him for it. Simp forever, always a loser. Now Xander was her partner at Evening Design, and judging from that casual intimacy, he was probably more than that. Derek pulled out his chair and sat down. He tried to look like he wasn't a mess, but his jacket was thrift store salvage, his hair was greasy, his face jaundiced, his chin covered in stubble, dirt under his nails. Across the polished conference table from Vivian, he felt like a stray dog tracked into a gallery opening. "What do you want?" His voice came out raspy. Vivian looked at him with that same neutral expression, the one that hurt more than anger. He'd have preferred hatred. At least hatred meant she still felt something for him. But this was nothing. He was paperwork to her. 3 things. Her tone was brisk, businesslike. "First, you owe me 60,000. The court ordered enforcement, but you don't have enough assets to levy. I'm offering you a payment plan, 500 a month until it's cleared." 500. Derek laughed, a brittle bark. "I'm lucky if I make 500 in a month. I don't have a job, you know that. That's your problem." Vivian's voice didn't waver. "If you don't pay, the court will freeze any income that enters your accounts. Your choice." She slid a document across the table. He didn't touch it. "Second." She paused. "The renovation on your parents' house, the one I paid for. 6,800 total. I'm not going after that. For your parents' sake." Derek blinked. He hadn't expected that. That house was the only roof over his parents' heads now, after they'd sold the county place. If Vivian had pushed for that money, they'd have been homeless. Third. Vivian pulled a photograph from beneath the other files and pushed it toward him. "Do you know this woman?" In the photo, a middle-aged woman in a floral cotton jacket, standing outside a convenience store holding a bag of rice. Derek's face twitched. "Why are you investigating her?" "Her name is Guifan Zhang. She's your neighbor from your hometown." Vivian's voice was soft, but each word landed like a blade. 3 months ago you borrowed 5,000 from her. The IOU said it was for your mother's medical treatment. But your mother's last hospital stay was paid for by your father, borrowing from relatives. So where did that 5,000 go? Derek's face went white. "None of your business." "It's not my business. But it is the court's business. Vivian pulled out another document. The day after you borrowed that money, you transferred all of it to an offshore betting account. If Ms. Zhang finds out, she can file a fraud complaint with the police. Derek shot to his feet, his chair scraping the floor with a shriek. Vivian, what the hell are you trying to do? You've already ruined me, isn't that enough? You want me locked up? Sit down. Vivian looked up at him. Her voice wasn't loud, but there was a weight in those two words that made the back of Derek's neck prickle. He stood frozen, glancing at Xander, who hadn't moved a muscle, but whose calm eyes promised physical consequences if Derek made a wrong move. Slowly, Derek sank back into his chair. I want one simple thing. Vivian gathered the 3 documents and tapped her fingernails against the tabletop. I want you to write a statement. From the day we met until our divorce. Everything you did to me. Psychological control, financial control, infidelity, exploiting my family's resources, systematic degradation. Everything. Write it out in full. Sign it. Fingerprint it. Why the hell would I do that? Because you owe it to me. Vivian's voice finally held a trace of emotion, but it was ice. If you don't write it, I'll take your gambling records, your fraud against Ms. Zhang, and your embezzlement of company funds to the police and the industry association. That won't be a civil matter anymore. Your construction license will be permanently revoked. You decide. Derek stared at her, sweat beading on his forehead. He wanted to scream, to flip the table, to make her scared like he used to. But he looked into Vivian's eyes and saw no fear. Not a shred. It hit him like a punch. The woman who used to cower in corners when he raised his voice was gone. In her place sat someone he'd never met before. Calm, razor sharp, holding every one of his sins in her palm like a cat toying with a mouse. When? His voice cracked. When did you become like this? Vivian smiled. Barely a curve, but something flashed in her eyes. Derek, I was always like this. You spent 7 years trying to make me into someone else. You failed. She pulled a pen and a stack of blank paper from her bag and set them before him. Write it. Clear and complete. Sign it and print it. After that, we're done. You go your way, I go mine. Square. Derek picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so hard the pen tip wobbled. He stared at the blank white page and images crashed through his mind. The first time he'd seen her at that conference, her profile as she turned, the late nights he'd plotted, coincidental run-ins, her smiling through tears on their wedding day, the first time he'd thrown a glass and she'd shrunk into the sofa corner, her empty gaze in that hospital room. He started writing. Word by word. He wrote that every coincidence had been engineered, every gesture of kindness calculated. He wrote that he'd married her to avenge his own resentment, to prove he could drag a privileged woman into the mud. He wrote that every insult, every restriction, every financial leash, all of it had been strategy. He wrote about Lin, about the side deals using Sioux family connections, about how he'd never felt an ounce of gratitude. As he wrote, his hands steadied. Something weirdly liberating crept over him. A confession, finally, of every rot he'd carried. It was easier than lying had ever been. He finished. His final sentence, Vivian Sue never wronged me. I wronged her. He signed it. Pressed his thumb in the ink pad and left his print. Wrote today's date. Vivian took the pages and read them through. She folded them carefully into her bag, stood up and extended her hand. Derek froze for a moment, then extended his own on instinct. Vivian clasped his fingertips, light, brief, like a handshake with a stranger, and gave one small shake. Goodbye, Derek. Not, never see you again. Just goodbye. Because from now on he would cease to exist in her world. He'd become a name she might remember but would never look back at. She let go, turned and walked toward the door. Xander followed. At the threshold he glanced back at Derek. Not with hostility, just appraisal, like a museum visitor scanning an exhibit. Coming. Vivian called from the doorway. The door clicked shut. Derek sat alone in the conference room, staring at the empty tabletop. He turned his hand over and looked at his palm, the spot where Vivian's fingers had touched him. A faint warmth lingered. He closed his fist, opened it, then he laughed. It was a bitter sound, so bitter that his nose stung and his eyes burned. He remembered the first time he'd seen her on that college stage, her long shadow in the setting sun, and the thought that had lodged in his chest like a splinter. Why doesn't she belong to me? She never had belonged to him. He'd taken her by force, imprisoned her, tried to break her. Now she'd flown away, far beyond his reach. And he was still sitting in this windowless room laughing at nothing. He deserved it. Chapter 7. New Life. 3 years later. Vivian stood in front of the freshly topped-out Evening Arts Center, craning her neck to take in the building she'd helmed from concept to completion. Its lines flowed like water across stone, the terracotta panels on its facade glowing deep ochre in the autumn sunset, as though the building had grown organically from the earth itself. A curved roof was punctuated by skylights that would cast shifting patterns of light across the interior throughout the day. This was the biggest project of her career, from bid to finish a 2-year marathon. The investor was Ms. Zhou, the developer who'd taken a chance on her 3 years ago. Now the building was the city's newest landmark, christened by critics as architecture that breathes. Behind her stood her team of 15, along with her parents who'd traveled from out of town. Grace was snapping photos nonstop, muttering about, "That corner is genius, and my students will be sketching this for weeks." Gregory did a slow lap around the entire building, twice, then returned with a poker face. Vivian's heart ticked up a beat. "Dad? What do you think?" Gregory was silent for a 3 count. Then he gave a firm nod. "Better than your old man." Vivian burst out laughing. "That's generous." "Truth." Gregory clapped her on the shoulder. "Your mother wanted you to study architecture and I argued against it. Thought you should do structural engineering. Safe for a girl," I said. "Thank God I lost that argument." Grace cut in, "You've never listened to me a day in your life. If I hadn't pushed her toward design, she'd be drafting foundation plans right now. Look around. Who's the load-bearing wall and who's the decorative facade?" The 3 of them dissolved into laughter. Xander walked up from behind, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He handed one to Vivian. He'd graduated from business partner to husband the previous year. A small ceremony with only the closest friends and family. Vivian had worn a champagne-colored cheapao instead of a wedding gown. Derek's white dress had been donated to charity years ago. "The press is here," Xander said. "You're the star today, no running off." "I wasn't planning to." Vivian took a sip of coffee. "Let's go do the interview." The journalists set up cameras and microphones and the questions came in waves. Design philosophy, industry trends, material choices, construction challenges. Vivian answered each one with ease, her gestures fluid as she diagrammed the building's structural logic in the air. The reporters scribbled and nodded. The last question came from a young woman in the back. "Miss Sue, I read that interview from 3 years ago where you said, 'The past is fertilizer, not a cage.' Looking back now, has that perspective changed at all?" Vivian considered, then smiled. "Yes. I'd add one thing. Past suffering can be fertilizer, but only if you have the courage to pull your roots out of the mud and transplant yourself somewhere the sun reaches. If you stay in that mud forever, the fertilizer becomes poison. You won't grow flowers, you'll rot." The journalist tilted her head. "And do you feel like you're in that sunny place now?" Vivian glanced back at the arts center, then at her parents and husband waiting at the edge of the crowd. She faced the camera, her smile soft but absolute. "Yes. Absolutely." After the interview, Xander dragged her to a small restaurant near the site for a team dinner. They packed 2 round tables, everyone buzzing with post-commission energy. Someone shouted that Vivian should pick up the tab. She waved a hand magnanimously. "Order whatever you want. I've got it tonight." Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. She picked up and a woman's voice came through, weeping, frantic. "Vivian? It's Derek's mother. I have no one else to ask. Derek's sick, liver failure, ascites. The hospital won't continue treatment unless we pay and we can't scrape together the money. We've borrowed from everyone. I'm begging you, he was your husband once." Vivian listened quietly. Mrs. Zhou went on. "Derek's liver was shutting down. He was skin and bones. The gambling debts had ballooned to over 50,000 with interest and collectors showed up daily. The hospital had stopped his meds. They were facing discharge. She was desperate. When she finished, Vivian spoke. "Mrs. Zhou, I'm very sorry to hear this. But I can't help. Our accounts were settled at the divorce. He's no longer my responsibility." Mrs. Zhou's sobs rose in pitch. "You can't just let him die. You were married." "Mrs. Zhou." Vivian cut in, her voice gentle but firm. The marriage was destroyed by Derek. You know better than anyone what he did to me. I've moved past that chapter. I'd urge you to do the same. The hospital has social assistance programs. Contact the district social services office for emergency aid. She ended the call and blocked the number. Xander leaned in. Who was that? Spam call. Vivian put her phone back on the table. Is the food here yet? I'm starving. That night, after they got home and she'd showered, Vivian scrolled through her phone in bed and came across a local news alert. Man with advanced cirrhosis admitted to community shelter after hospital discharge. The photo was blurry. A gaunt figure in a wheelchair, head bowed, hair half gray. Vivian recognized him. She looked at the screen for 3 seconds. The face was unrecognizable from the cheap-suited man with the red ears she'd once known. Hollow cheeks, blue-gray lips. One word came to mind: withered. She swiped past it. The next story was about her art center being named one of the top 10 buildings of the year. She opened the comments. People writing, "This designer is a woman? So impressive. I have to visit this place." And one that said, "I heard she survived something awful. So inspiring." She smiled, locked the screen and set the phone on the nightstand. Xander came out of the bathroom, saw her still awake and slid into bed behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "Tomorrow's breakfast." "Can you think about something more substantial?" "Breakfast is substantial. Most important meal of the day." Xander laughed and squeezed her. Fine, fine. I'll cook tomorrow. Egg and cheese sandwich. With avocado. With avocado. Done. Vivian turned onto her side and burrowed into the pillow, her lips curved upward. Outside, the moonlight lay quiet over the sleeping city. She listened to Xander's steady breathing and felt her chest fill with something full and warm. She remembered that morning 6 years ago, sitting on that bench outside the operating room, the fluorescent light pinning her to the cold floor, believing her life had shattered beyond repair. She hadn't known what the future held. She just held on to one stubborn breath and refused to let go. Now she knew, holding on had been the right choice. That breath had pulled her out of the well and brought her to this place. Career, family, love, public recognition, and private peace. She was like steel that had been tempered in fire. Hard, bright, every scratch a metal. And Derek? He was one chapter in her book. A chapter full of darkness and damp. But once you turned the page, every subsequent leaf was bathed in sunlight. What goes around comes around. He tried to destroy her and ended up destroying himself. She'd thought she was finished, and instead she'd become the kind of life everyone envies. That was enough.